blueprint for success with Facebook ads. Let's dive into this. Now, from running $1 million days to the very first lead gen and DPA ads, helping with the product development and testing for the Power 5. I've helped build a lot of what you use now. And this is what you need to know to move forward. The honest truth is Facebook hasn't really changed that much in a long time. The only real difference between 3 years ago and today is that doing things poorly is only getting more and more harmful. Bottom line of your business. Doing well, it's never been easy. Since iOS 14 dropped, there's been a lot of panic and misinformation on how to be successful when it comes to Facebook ads. What we have to understand is that Facebook has never been smarter than it is today. It has never been easier to be successful on less work in the platform than it is today. iOS 14 didn't really have that much of an effect, regardless of what anybody says. And if you disagree with that, comment below, and I'll gladly steer you in the right direction to debunk any of those myths. So let's get down to the 4 things you absolutely need to know to make this your best year on Facebook ever. The first thing that we have to understand is audiences. Let's start off with the most obvious and yet most controversial fact about targeting. The ads do the targeting. And broad is the only audience you're ever going to need. Remember, now, broad is a noun, not an adjective. So let's get into defining exactly what that means. Broad is age, gender, and location. Now, you're going to see a lot of hype and misinformation around people suggesting you do silly things like use interest groups and lookalike audiences and focus on retargeting. Objectively speaking, these are almost all really, really bad ideas. And let's dive into why, because I think you're going to really need to understand that. First off, audiences don't target. They are costly restrictions on each post ID's own lookalike audience. Remember, every ad makes its own audience, and we're going to get to that more in a minute. But in short, interest groups are an obsolete technology. They were built to compete with Google's affinity audiences a decade ago. And Facebook stopped supporting them about 5 years ago. Lookalikes are rarely scalable because they're only a very narrow focus on the opportunity for short gains. And broad, well, it does retargeting anyway. You don't believe me? Is your frequency more than 1? Yes, it's retargeting. Every single impression that you will ever deliver, even on the very first of your very first campaign, on your very first page, in your very first account, will be a retargeting impression. Because Facebook is trying to show a user content that they want to see based on their previous behavior. Remember, iOS 14 has nothing to do with what people have done inside of Facebook, and Facebook knows everything you've done in Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Messenger. And that's what really matters. Facebook is a creative and business model game. Audiences are a crutch for a short-term win that can easily cost you the future that you deserve. Detailed targeting costs more in the algorithm. Facebook used to actually show you this added tax per option. Literally said, oh, you want to add this interest group? It's 20 cents extra. You want to add this thing? It's 40 cents extra. And I hear you saying, 40 cents, who cares? This is back when CPMs were $2. How much more do you think you're paying for that interest group today? Plus, it heavily restricts incremental lift. Another thing we have to understand is that attribution is a lie. The idea that any one ad or ad set or channel is responsible for any single transaction, much less a scalable customer journey for the market, is a complete fallacy. Do you honestly think that the reason somebody bought those sneakers from you today was because that ad taught them what a shoe was and they clicked on it today for the first time ever and bought from you? Really? Decades ago, salespeople for digital marketing platforms successfully convinced generations of professionals in the industry that there was a way to assign credit for specific actions, like a purchase. But in reality, everybody worth their salt knows that this is kind of BS. For instance, if you have a car dealership, did you sell the car because of the car salesperson? Or was it the fact that people grow up seeing cars and there's billboards and television commercials and friends and everything else that got them to walk into the dealership in the first place? By the logic, the salesperson gets credit. Why not just hire 1,000 salespeople and become a billionaire overnight? Giving an ad the attribution for making a sale, giving it credit for the entire customer journey that led up to the impression before somebody clicked to buy, that has to feel like complete nonsense, right? But because nobody ever exists in a vacuum. That might be the third ad they see from you today after several emails and a Google search earlier this week. The reason that this is important is because you can't take the last thing in a long journey and say that is why it happened and then only focus on making this thing better or throwing all of your money or whatever on this, because it won't move the needle for everything that happened before. Now, the other side of attribution and optimization is whether or not we give attribution to a view or a click. Now, this situation can be more complicated, but how we actually employ this thinking in Facebook is fairly simple. There's really one of two ways, but so that you know, what we're going to cover is we have a 1-day or 7-day click. And we have the option of saying, do we include view through or not? What that means is, do we say that somebody seeing our ad, even if they didn't click on it, should we consider that that's important for our decision making? And is it important for Facebook to look at that data point to try to curate other customer journeys to get somebody to make a purchase? So example A, you are driving dozens or hundreds of conversions a day. So relying on the click today gives you enough volume to allow the machine learning to understand your needs and deliver consistent and reliable results. This would be click only. Sometimes a 7-day or a 1-day click view. And when you have that much data, that's a completely reasonable way of optimizing your Facebook ad. Example B, says you are not creating enough conversion data on any given day to have more than a very few number of moving parts inside of Facebook to consistently and reliably deliver you a stable and projectable result. So in example B, we need to rely on more than just the last click from today. Now, for example A, remember example A being that you are driving dozens or hundreds of conversions on a daily basis, and you're able to really focus in on that last touch point of what you're optimizing Facebook to do for you. That means you should be running a one-day click. Hyperbolically highest data integrity to the last action, because you know how Facebook operates inside of your business's ecosystem. Example B, where you don't drive dozens or hundreds of conversions a day, that means you should be running a 7-day click, 1-day view. And there's really no good reason to use anything else. Either you go for most data integrity, which is example A, 1-day click, or you go for most data volume, which is 7-day click, 1-day view. There's no reason to sell yourself short by kind of not being as good at either of those options. There is absolutely no reason to ever worry about the funnel in Facebook because of 3 reasons. Number 1, every impression is a retargeting impression anyway. Number 2, Facebook is doing the job of creating intent at scale. That's Facebook's job. Number 3, paying extra for smaller audiences that aren't scalable is a really bad business. Also, and it pains me that this doesn't go without saying, but you don't need to run engagement campaigns or traffic campaigns. You need to stop thinking about prospecting ads or retargeting ads for the most part. You need to stop treating Facebook like it's Google or email or really anything else that it isn't. Anybody that tells you different is just dead wrong. Last thing I'll say here is dynamic creative is your best friend. If you are still testing ads by building a bunch of single posts, please stop right away. Just there's no good reason to do that. If you're not running simple dynamic creative tests, you are spending extra money, working extra hard to disrespect Facebook and make success more difficult. And I've got tons of resources on dynamic creatives, and I highly recommend that you look for them. We don't need to dive into all of it now, but if you're not using dynamic creatives, you're not doing your job properly.